"Mom, I sold the house. Now you just need to rest." Those words rang out while I still held my teacup, and just 1 second later, my whole life collapsed. I, Eleanor Grace, 67 years old, was robbed of everything by my own son. The house, the apple orchard, and my trust. They told me I was too old to keep the property, then forced me out into the street in the freezing Vermont rain. But they forgot one thing. I was the one who planted the very first apple tree in that orchard, and when a mother loses everything, she has nothing left to fear. I did not cry. I only stood there, watching their car fade into the curtain of rain, and swore I would take back every single thing. Not with a knife, but with memory, with justice, and with a silence that could kill. Stay with me, for from that night, a mother's vengeance began to take root. I still remember that morning, an October morning in Vermont, when the mist still blurred the apple-covered hills in the distance. I was making tea, the same tea I had drunk for 30 years, with a slice of dried apple and a little cinnamon. Everything seemed peacefully still, until a knock sounded at the door. 3 knocks, dry, cold, with not a hint of hesitation. The postman handed me a thick envelope sealed with the City Hall stamp. I wasn't worried. I assumed it was the usual annual land tax paperwork. But when I opened it, the printed letters on the page seemed to cut at my eyes. The house and apple orchard at 113 Applewood Lane, Vermont have now been transferred to Northfield Development Company, signed by co-owners Michael Grace, Susan Grace, and Daniel Grace. I read it again, 3 times. My heart slid in my chest as if falling into a void. Michael, Susan, Daniel. The names of my 3 children. I put the paper down on the table. My hands shook, but not from fear. They trembled because everything suddenly lost meaning. I tried to recall the last time the children had spoken to me. It was my birthday, last month. Michael gave me a knitted scarf. Susan asked if I needed someone to come clean the house. Daniel sent flowers by mail. No one mentioned selling the house. No word, no sign. I stepped out onto the porch and looked over the apple orchard stretching beneath the mist. At this season, the leaves had turned gold, the fruit hung quietly from the branches, and the wind carried the sweet smell of thyme. That orchard had once been my life, the place where my husband, Thomas, planted the first tree with hands full of soil. He used to say, "Eleanor, one day the children will understand. There are things money cannot buy." They never understood. And perhaps now it didn't matter. I sank into the wooden chair. In that moment, I thought I heard Thomas, his voice low, warm, and distant, whisper at my ear, "Don't cry. This is not the end." I looked up through the fogged glass and saw my reflected face, aged, tired, but in my eyes, something was changing. A thin thread of light, but persistent. Not despair, but resolve. I stood, wiped away the tears. Then I looked around the house, every wall, every frame, every scratch on the wooden floor where the children once ran. I knew every corner of this house. I knew it better than my children, those people who now treated this place as nothing more than a line item in an investment ledger. I picked up the envelope again, placed it on the table, and sat down. The tea had gone cold, but I took a sip anyway. I needed that bitterness to wake me. I did not call anyone. I did not shout. I simply remained silent. Silence is something my children never understood, that it is not weakness. It is the stillness before the storm rises. That night I did not sleep. I opened the wooden drawer where Thomas used to keep land deeds, tax papers, and old letters. The documents were worthless now, but in my husband's shaky handwriting I recognized something. He had suspected this day. In an unsent letter, he wrote, "If the day comes when you are betrayed, do not rush to blame. Remember that everything they take from you, you can take back. But this time, take it back with memory and with justice." I closed the letter and placed it over my heart. My heart beat slow, but heavy. Outside, the wind howled across the porch, carrying a bone-cutting chill. I knew I had to leave, at least for a while. But before I went, I did one last thing. I took the old notebook, opened to the first page, and wrote, "Today they took my house. Tomorrow I will take everything back. Not only the house, but also my honor." Then I folded the notebook, slipped it into my coat pocket. The yellow light silently lit my face, and I realized, in those eyes there was no longer the shadow of a weak mother. There remained only a woman who had lost everything, and who was about to start again by making everyone pay. That night I did not sleep. Vermont wind blew against the old window panes, tapping the fogged glass with a sound like a measured warning. I sat at the table, the yellow lamp casting my long shadow on the wall, quietly writing each line in the little notebook. Tomorrow someone will come. I didn't know why I believed it, but a mother's intuition rarely lies. The next morning I heard the familiar sound of an engine on the drive, wheels grinding over gravel. Then a voice, deep, thick, with a tone half pity, half command. "Mom, it's Michael." I looked up, the door opened, and Michael stepped in. It had been 10 years. I had never seen my eldest look so polished. A gray suit, a dark tie, shoes shining like mirrors. His hair was neatly combed, and the scent of expensive cologne overpowered the lingering smell of ripe apples in the house. My son, the child who once cried when he lost his first baby tooth, now stood before me like a stranger. "I know you're shocked," Michael said, his voice overly gentle. "But you have to understand, we only want what's best for you. You can't stay in this old house forever. If we sell it, you'll have money to rest, nothing to worry about." I was silent. Each word he spoke felt like a dull blade against my heart. Not sharp enough to kill, but enough to make blood seep beneath the skin. I nodded slightly, signaling him to sit. Then I poured tea. The same tea I had brewed for 30 years, but today its taste was strangely bitter. Michael looked around the house, his gaze skimming over each item as if pricing them. He smiled when he saw the old wooden cabinet, the one I knew still held my husband's papers. I recognized that look, the look of someone who had not come merely to visit Mother. "The company is doing well, Mom," Michael said, leaning back in his chair. "We just want to move you into a nearby nursing home. There are nurses, care, far better amenities than here." "A nursing home," I repeated, my voice low, almost a whisper. "So, you're evicting me from my own house?" Michael frowned slightly. "Don't say that I'm doing all this for your future." For your future. Those 4 words echoed in my head like a cruel refrain. What future is built on betrayal? I looked straight into my son's eyes. Those eyes were no longer the ones that used to hold my hand through that first blizzard. They were the eyes of someone who had learned to lie without blinking. I smiled, so small it was almost imperceptible. "Well done, Michael," I said. "Your father would be proud of you." The words made Michael pause. For a moment I saw something flash across his face, a thin streak of fear, then vanish as quickly as it had appeared. I poured more tea, deliberately letting the cup tap the saucer, a cold, resonant sound in the quiet house. "You know," I continued, "your father used to say, 'The bigger the business, the lighter the words. Otherwise, they become evidence.'" Michael laughed, but the smile never reached his eyes. "You're still the same, always stern." I didn't answer. Instead, I slowly reached into my cardigan pocket and took out the small voice recorder Thomas had given me years ago, when he said, "Keep what's important, because human memory can be distorted." I turned it on in the silence, to record every word of my dutiful son. "I'm only doing what's right, Mom," Michael said, his voice growing more confident. "You don't understand the value of this land. We sold to Northfield. They'll build a resort, tenfold the value. You could live comfortably for the rest of your life." I nodded, still silent. In my mind, each word flipped a small switch. Northfield, the contract, the signatures. I kept every fragment of information. Then I asked softly, "Are you sure Father would have agreed?" Michael hesitated a second time. "Dad has been gone 10 years, Mom." "I know." I looked him squarely in the eye. "But sometimes the dead still know who betrays them." The room fell quiet. Outside, the wind picked up, making the window rattle as if someone knocked. Michael stood, offered a few perfunctory comments, then left. But before he went, I heard him murmur into his phone, thinking I wasn't paying attention. "Mom suspects nothing. Everything's going smoothly." When the door closed, I rose and went to the window, watching my son's car fade down the leaf-strewn drive. On the table, the teacup still gave off a faint warmth, steam rising like a ghost. I put my hand over it, feeling the last warmth left in the house that had been our home. Then I opened the drawer, took out the little notebook, and wrote the second line beneath yesterday's entry. Michael says he does it for me, but I know, from that moment, my fight has begun. I folded the notebook and slipped it into my pocket. Morning light filtered through the glass and lit my face, an aged face, but with eyes clear, cold, and sharper than ever. I whispered, as if speaking to myself or to Thomas's spirit lingering somewhere nearby. "They forgot. I was the one who taught them how to survive. Now it's time I teach them how to pay." After Michael left, the house returned to silence, yet I felt no peace. The empty space seemed to challenge me to move forward, as if reminding me, "Go on, Eleanor. This is only the beginning." I set the notebook down on the table, my hand still trembling slightly, and walked toward the study where Thomas had left behind files and old memories. Each sheet of paper, each letter carried the scent of ink and dust, a smell only old houses can keep. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, only that a part of me needed to find it. The old wooden drawer creaked as I opened it. Before me lay stacks of files, invoices, and a small metal box, carefully locked. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. I remembered Thomas saying, "Eleanor, if the day comes when you are betrayed, look in this metal box. It will give you what you need more than any sword or land." I pressed the latch, the mechanical click echoing softly like the past whispering my name. Inside, beyond some mundane financial papers, were carefully handwritten old letters. The ink had faded, the paper yellowed, yet the handwriting remained firm, like Thomas's very breath. I opened the first letter. The familiar script made my heart ache. "Eleanor, if one day you face the choice to keep or lose everything, remember that your father still holds secret shares. No one knows, not even the children, until the right time. This is what I leave to protect our family, but also to answer those who abuse their power." I exhaled, feeling both pain and a strange surge of hope. Michael and the other children had sold the house. They thought they had won, but they had no idea what Thomas had hidden. I smiled softly, but the smile was cold, sharp as a knife. I continued rifling through the remaining letters. Each letter was a piece of memory. Business plans, undisclosed shares, deals only Thomas knew. One letter revealed that in the family agricultural company, Thomas had left me an anonymous amount of shares held under the name of an intermediary company, one that Michael and the others had never checked. "So," I whispered, my voice trembling but resolute, "everything they stole isn't everything." I sat down in the center of the room, holding the letters in my hands, staring at the ceiling. Each line was a puzzle piece, each detail slowly forming a larger picture. A plan for revenge that was neither rushed nor loud, but deliberate and cold. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need direct confrontation. I only needed information, time, and silence. That would be my weapon. The old clock ticked steadily, measuring each second for my plan. I imagined Michael returning, still with his confident smile, still believing that everything was in his hands. But no, he had never known that Eleanor Grace never lets everything slip away so easily. I placed a letter on the table and looked out the window. Afternoon sunlight pierced through the apple leaves, illuminating the golden dust on the floor. Each falling leaf reminded me, time passes, but the seeds of vengeance are sprouting in my heart. Outside, insects chirped. The wind rustled the branches, creating a whispering sound. They don't know, but Mother knows, and Mother will act. I drew a deep breath, a sense of newfound power rising within me. The shares, the papers, the plans, all in my hands, known only to me. I smiled once more, but this time, it was not just a mother's smile. It was a warrior's. Michael, Susan, Daniel, you thought you had won, but I have found the secret in the old mailbox, and from now on, every step I take will make you pay. I picked up the notebook and wrote a new line beside Thomas's letter. They took my house, but they have not taken the most important thing, the truth and justice. From now on, every action I take will be revenge, not out of hatred, but for the fairness they thought I no longer had the strength to pursue. I lifted my head and looked at the apple orchard outside the window, where sunlight glimmered over each ripe red fruit. In that moment, I knew. My long silence had ended. A quiet war had begun, with memory, with planning, with the secret shares that Michael and the children had never known existed. And this time, they would have to learn a lesson that no warning could ever foretell. After uncovering Thomas's old letters, the secret shares, and quietly holding every fragment of evidence in my hands, I knew one thing. The time had come. Not by shouting, not by brawling. The most effective revenge begins with silence, with observation, with careful calculation. I folded Thomas's letter, placed it in my notebook, and closed my eyes to take a deep breath. One step, a small step, but steady. I would enter a game the children and the greedy had no idea existed. When Michael left the house the day before, I knew his confident gaze and triumphant smile were the perfect bait for my plan. If I acted too soon, they would grow suspicious. I needed to pretend to be weak, to play the part of an elderly mother who had lost everything, easy to bully. That way they would continue to make mistakes, and I would record every detail. I told myself, stay here a few weeks. Close your eyes and observe. Eavesdrop, remember, and learn to judge each person around you. I picked up the phone, pretended to call a friend, and with a trembling voice said, I'm so scared. I don't know what they'll do next. I let Michael overhear. He nodded, convinced he still controlled everything. but he didn't know I had begun to return to a battle he was unaware of. On the first day, I cleaned the living room and watched Michael and Susan prepare financial files. The tapping of keyboards, the rustle of papers in steady rhythm. I walked the hallway, eyes following each gesture, each glance, each counterfeit smile. My daughter-in-law, Susan, was clearly the one orchestrating the sale. She spoke with the family lawyer in a soft but decisive tone, stressing each word as if manipulating. I knew that with one slip she would reveal her true nature. I began to record their conversations secretly. The small voice recorder, hidden in my cardigan pocket, was the perfect tool. Every word, every inflection, every look. I recorded it all. I observed greed, calculation, a coldness I'd never seen before in the children I had loved. Michael focused on numbers. Sure, I wasn't paying attention, but I recorded every keystroke, every signature on the papers. One afternoon, I stood by the window looking out over the orchard. Golden leaves carpeted the ground, the scent of damp earth mixed with ripe apples in the air. I murmured to myself, "Things will be more complicated than they think. They sold my house, but they don't know that I hold the evidence. I know who they truly are." Susan entered with a folder and a practiced smile. "Are you all right, Mother? I think you should rest. Let us handle everything," she said. I smiled, so faint she mistook it for frailty and helplessness. In my eyes, Susan did not see a spark. I looked her straight in the eye and said in a low voice, "Yes, I will rest. But I also need to keep an eye on a few things." She nodded, believing me weak and unaware, not knowing those words were both bait and a discreet message that I was awake and calculating. Every move of theirs was under my watch, every word recorded. Michael, Susan, and even the family lawyer, they thought they had won. But they did not know that Eleanor Grace never allows herself to be used twice. Over the following weeks, I continued to eavesdrop, observe, and gather information. Each conversation, each footstep in the house was memorized. I knew that when the right moment came, these details would become perfect tools of revenge. Every piece of evidence would force the greedy to pay. And in the silence of night, sitting by the window, I wrote in the notebook, "They thought I had lost everything, but I know. True power does not lie in the walls or the papers they stole, but in knowledge, patience, and a plan they never suspected. I will begin here, one step at a time." Outside, the wind whistled through the apple branches. Ripe, red fruit trembled in the afternoon sun. Every breath, every sound, every detail I recorded would be an indispensable part of the revenge game I was preparing to start. And this time, no one, not even Michael and Susan, could suspect that Eleanor Grace was planning, and that her plan would change everything. The night after I began eavesdropping and recording their every word, I sat at the table, the yellow lamp gently sheltering the secrets that had just been revealed. I closed the notebook, set it beside Thomas's letter, and told myself, one more step. In that quiet moment, hearing gravel toss outside the gate, I knew someone was coming, but it wasn't Michael. The visitor moved slowly, slightly stooped, carrying a faded leather bag, a man I hadn't seen in years yet who felt oddly familiar. Mr. Jacob, Thomas's old friend, the man who had kept the books when Thomas ran the agricultural company. Jacob stood on the threshold, his silver hair blending into the afternoon mist. He knocked with thin fingers, his voice plain but carrying a certain steadiness. "Eleanor, I saw the letter Thomas sent you. I know you need the truth." I opened the door and looked at the corners of his eyes, the wrinkles of someone who had witnessed defeat and victory. In his gaze there was regret, but also resolve. He had come at exactly the right moment. We sat facing each other in the parlor, the clock ticking as if counting down to the plans about to begin. Jacob had a sheaf of old papers, faint photocopies, numbers, handwritten notes that only an accountant would understand. "Thomas left you a mark, Eleanor. I've kept it secret for years because he feared it would cause division. He believed you, more than anyone, would know how to use it." He said this and placed a sheet on the table. There, in Thomas's small script, appeared figures, dates, names of intermediary legal entities. I read. Each number fit, like a brick, into the picture Thomas had built. Shares hidden under the names of shell companies, accounts recorded as welfare funds, transfer clauses that only take effect with authenticated documents from the true beneficiary. And that beneficiary, according to Thomas's careful will, was me. My heart felt as if it leapt from my chest. Thomas's letters and notes were not merely memories. They were legal proof, a weapon that Michael and his accomplices had not suspected. Jacob laid his hand over mine, his thin hand warm. I waited for this day. When Thomas died, he told me, "If anyone steals what belongs to you, give everything to her when she is ready." He spoke in a gentle voice, but in every word I heard the pain and anger long suppressed. I looked at Jacob, the man who had watched Thomas balance every number, who knew every line item on the ledger, and realized I was not alone. Between us, the conversation quickly turned to strategy. Jacob presented details, forged contracts, altered signatures, transactions routed through a network of entities Michael and Susan used to hide profits. "They tidied everything to look legitimate," Jacob said. "But there are places they broke the law. Wrong dates on documents, inconsistent signatures, tampered records." He threw down a few scanned signature comparisons. I looked and saw the curves and ink strokes glaringly different. The greedy had been so confident they forgot signatures can be scrutinized. My mind shifted swiftly from the sting of betrayal to something else. Opportunity. What they thought was victory was actually a turning point for the plan I had never revealed. I looked at Jacob and saw in him not only an ally, but the guarantor of the truth. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice dry but sharp. Jacob answered, "We collect, we protect, and then we expose, but in a way that leaves them no time to respond. We need testimony, records, and a lawyer who is not afraid to speak the truth." He named a few people he'd worked with under Thomas, tough lawyers willing to face legal danger. Emotions crashed through me like a tide, resentment, but turned into plan. I remembered Thomas on nights at his desk whispering, "Eleanor, if it happens, be silent and calculate. Rage should be the seed of strategy." I smiled faintly, for the first time in many days, not from loss but from hope of restoring justice. Jacob looked at me with respect. "Thomas trusted you. He entrusted me with protecting the evidence until you were ready." He placed another envelope on the table containing legitimate copies he had kept secret, the share registry, undisclosed authorization documents, and account numbers at the local bank. Hearing the word account, my chest tightened. Those numbers could turn the hunger for property into real justice. Jacob continued, "There is an account Michael does not know about. Thomas split the shares, sent them into a fund that can only be withdrawn with a special confirmation code. I am the keeper of that code." I closed my eyes and tasted the salt of tears that were not from pain, but from the emergence of justice. We will not raise the alarm. We will act when everything is ready, and then justice will come like a storm. We drafted an initial plan right there in the parlor. Jacob would continue to supply document copies. I would keep collecting Michael and Susan's words via recordings, and we would find a lawyer capable of triggering the clauses Thomas left in his will. Each step had to be discreet. Each piece of evidence had to be authenticated. Everything had to be done so that when the truth surfaced, it would turn the thieves into victims of their own greed. When Jacob left, he looked back at the house once more, like a man turning his back on a past era, but preparing for a different future. He patted my hand gently. "Eleanor, Thomas was right to trust you. Let me go find what remains. We will make them pay, but with the truth." I closed the door. A 67-year-old woman stood alone in the room, but in my heart there was no space for fear. Instead, there was a flame, warmed by the loyalty of an unexpected ally. That night, I opened the papers Jacob had left and read each number in turn, as if naming an enemy. Every piece of evidence, every signature, every account was a brick in the wall of justice I would build. I wrote in the notebook, "Not every ally is obvious. An old friend today is the bridge to the truth. They will not know when the storm hits." And silently I vowed, this time, revenge would not only reclaim the house, it would restore justice and give Thomas and me a peace money could never buy. After the meeting with Jacob, night fell like a thick black veil. Yet in my heart, tiny sparks began to appear. Not fragile hope, but intentions that had been carefully planted. The next morning I opened my notebook, reviewing Thomas's words and the document copies Jacob had provided, pondering how to turn that silent power into reality. I didn't have enough cash to reclaim everything at once, nor did I want to act directly, for fear the children would notice. So I chose the long path, planting seeds quietly and patiently. I began by opening a small account under the name of a local charity I had supported in my youth. No one was surprised to see small contributions under Apple Orchard Preservation Society. From there, I had a few old friends act as proxies to buy fractional shares, portions Michael and Susan thought they had already secured. Each transaction was small, silent, like an ant carrying a seed along a path. No one noticed. I sent letters, made donations, signed under different names, used verification codes that Jacob helped me activate. And little by little, the web of ownership began to tighten. Each purchase made my heart race. I imagined bending a tiny apple seed and planting it in the corner of the old orchard. People grow trees by hand. I was rebuilding a legacy with calculation, caution, and, at times, deception. I hired an old lawyer I trusted, who asked few questions and nodded approvingly at the proper documentation. He created small shell LLCs, tiny as seeds, enough to hide the true owner. And I, Eleanor, stood behind it all, watching each patch of the power orchard being covered by layers of secrecy. For weeks I attended shareholder meetings as an observer. I sat in the back row, listening to promises, development plans, and the smug laughter of Michael as he boasted about his profit-boosting strategies. They didn't realize the shadow I was weaving, unaware that every word had been recorded, every decision potentially countered by the evidence I was collecting. When Michael shouted about an expansion plan, I silently guessed how many shares he actually owned, smiling inwardly as I realized some were slowly returning to me. There were days I was nearly exhausted, pretending to be frail to draw sympathy, an art I had never performed before. I allowed Susan to take me to the doctor. Let Daniel and some relatives comfort me. They stroked, they promised. My heart ached, yet I knew every hug, every consolation was the perfect cover for the moves they never saw. I recorded, photographed documents, copied contracts, like a hunter collecting ashes for rebirth. Jacob helped me verify every signature, every figure, pointing out their mistakes, and we learned to exploit each gap. Once, Michael drove me past a plot he considered developed. He gestured to stakes, spoke of his vision, the legacy he wanted to leave. I listened, eyes following the path he pointed to, but in my mind I calculated how one day I would audit those transactions. Legacy, I thought, may just be a disguise for greed. I turned away, feeling the chill of satisfaction, sweet and bitter like biting into a ripe apple. As the fractional shares gradually accumulated, I did not rush to reveal them. Silence was power. I saw myself like a gardener, watering every drop, pulling every weed, waiting for roots to take hold. I remembered Thomas sitting on the porch on quiet afternoons, telling stories of the hard years he and our family had endured. He used to say, "It's not about how much you have, but knowing how to hold on to what's yours." Now, those words were an unshakable encouragement. Yet it wasn't only technique and strategy. Sometimes I wondered, was revenge the only path to justice? At night, sitting amid copies of contracts, my eyes drifting to a framed photo of Thomas smiling beside me, I felt emptiness. I remembered nursing my children, sleepless nights tending the sick, afternoons taking them to the playground. Those memories made me tender but also strengthened me. I was acting not only for myself but for the memory of the departed, for the child in me who once believed family meant everything. The plan carried risks. Occasionally, one of my small entities drew attention. A lawyer began questioning the source of funds. Jacob and I were prepared. We had document copies, proper evidence, and a plausible story. But more than anything, we had perseverance. Each confrontation felt like a new orchard, battered, pruned, but sprouting stronger shoots. Months passed, and the apples ripened from green to red. I stood in the orchard, fingertips brushing a remaining fruit, remembering the tiny seeds I had planted on paper. Every share I purchased, every contract I reviewed, every word I recorded, all were seeds buried in the soil. I was no longer the disgraced mother standing on the sidelines of life. I was the one cultivating the orchard anew, with intellect and patience. And when the trees grew and the fruits ripened, they would see that what they thought was lost was something they would never be allowed to own forever. After weeks of quietly planting seeds, every step I took was as careful as an orchardist tending apples in a light autumn rain. I began to feel the subtle power radiating from the small shares I had quietly reclaimed. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. Michael and Susan remained confident they had taken it all, convinced that this frail old mother could do nothing. But their world was about to be overturned by the very child they believed loyal and innocent, my youngest daughter, the one I had loved and protected all these years. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves scattered across the roof, Lily visited, her remorse overly rehearsed. She embraced me, whispering sweet apologies. "Mother, I'm sorry. I didn't understand everything." Her voice was soft as velvet, eyes shimmering, and for a fleeting moment, a part of me softened. I inhaled deeply, letting warmth fill my chest, only to pretend afterward that my guard was down. I smiled, squeezing her hand, and said calmly, "We all lose our way sometimes, Lily." Yet I had learned an important lesson. In family, love is not always protection. Sometimes it is a double-edged sword. I watched Lily closely, noticing subtle gestures she didn't realize I observed. Her hand brushed her purse. Her eyes flicked over the desk where I kept the safe, the place holding the evidence, numbers, and assets Thomas and Jacob had safeguarded. I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly, pretending not to notice. Every movement, every glance was a lie. I knew Lily had not come merely to apologize. She came seeking the safe, like a clever child reaching for what she thought was rightfully hers. We sat for tea, sunlight spilling across framed family photos. I listened, smiled lightly at her questions about work and changes in the company. She spoke of her guilt, her fear that I would never forgive. I nodded, occasionally adding a comment to make her believe I knew nothing. But in my mind, I observed every action, every hesitation, every breath. I knew she was scheming, but I also knew a secret. She would fail if I remained silent and continued collecting evidence. After she left, I checked the safe, and a quiet smile spread across my lips. Nothing was missing. I wrote in my notebook, "The trail runs deeper than imagination. It comes from those I trust most. But they do not know Eleanor Grace does more than watch. I am prepared for every move." I remembered teaching Lily lessons about honesty and patience, and now the irony was suffocating. She, whom I had trusted, was the final piece helping me verify the entire plan. In the following weeks, I became even more cautious, feigning worry and indifference, but every move was calculated. Each time Lily asked about the safe, I looked at her with gentle eyes and slowly replied, "I don't remember where I put it, dear." She nodded, completely trusting, leaving with false reassurance. Yet I knew her mind was spinning with schemes, and I was one step ahead. I began setting false scenarios, documents, contracts, and random agreements to lure Lily into a trap. The snares were so subtle she would not recognize them until too late. Each time she approached the safe, I had measures to observe from afar. Every step she took was recorded by Jacob and me. I knew when the time came, Lily would face the consequences of her own betrayal, and I would stand firm, like a gardener watching trees ripen on the land she once thought was hers. That evening, I sat by the window, golden lamplight falling on my desk, pen in hand, documenting every detail of Lily's actions. The wind whistled through the apple orchard. Ripe red fruit swayed with the breath of autumn. I wrote, "They think remorse is an opportunity to take. They do not know that this very remorse is the veil through which Eleanor Grace sows seeds of justice, reclaiming stolen power." I felt the profound strength known only to those who have lost everything. The trail can hurt, but wielded wisely, it transforms pain into power, love into strategy, and turns even the closest enemies into instruments of ultimate victory. And I, Eleanor, stood between past and present, watching each seed I planted begin to sprout, while the shadow of betrayal still lingered in hidden corners. After pretending to be weak and observing my youngest daughter, I felt the subtle rhythm of power slowly returning to me. The shares I had acquired, the evidence Jacob had provided, all were forming a complete picture. But it was not yet time to reveal it to the light. I sat in my study, looking out at the apple orchard where autumn had begun to gild each leaf, and I realized it was time to sow the final seeds. The harvest season. News began to spread across local newspapers and financial websites. My children's company was facing serious fraud allegations. Fake contracts, hidden financial transactions, and manipulated profits were under investigation. Michael and Susan panicked but still did not know who was behind it. They assumed the accusations came from a competitor or some regulatory agency by chance. They had no idea that it was I, Eleanor, the mother they once underestimated, pulling all the strings. I executed everything in secret through an intermediary company that Jacob and I had established. No names, no addresses. Only meticulously prepared legal documents and verifiable paperwork. Each lawsuit, each notification sent out bore a subtle mark, compelling Michael and Susan to respond, yet revealing nothing of my identity. I leaned against the desk, my hand trembling slightly as I signed the papers. But inside I felt an extraordinary sense of freedom. For the first time in years, I was no longer the one pushed aside, but the one in control. Throughout the process, I maintained the image of a frail mother, often sitting on the porch steps, watching the golden leaves fall, my eyes seemingly full of sorrow, but actually observing every move of my enemies. I recorded every conversation, stored messages, and collected evidence that Michael and Susan inadvertently revealed while discussing how to conceal profits and fabricate reports. Every tiny detail, every slip-up, I recorded in my notebook, like a farmer marking the seasons to know when the fruit would ripen. On the first day the court accepted the lawsuits, I stood outside the courtroom door, watching Michael and Susan enter with confident faces. Yet beneath it all, quiet panic simmered. I smiled in the shadows, knowing the storm was about to hit. I recalled the years of caring for them, the nights spent awake by my children's sickbeds, and the bittersweet realization that greed could turn people into enemies. But now I had transformed that pain into strength, every loss and every sorrow into tools of revenge. That afternoon, Jacob called, his voice a mix of exhilaration and tension. "Eleanor, the files have been submitted. The court has accepted them. Everything is going as planned. Michael and Susan won't realize who is behind this until it's too late." I responded with a faint smile, a deep sense of completeness swelling within me. Every step, every calculation was building the perfect storm. A harvest for those who once thought they could take everything from me. That evening I sat in my study, the yellow light spilling across the open papers before me. I closed my eyes and imagined Michael and Susan reading the notices, their hearts sinking as they realized that every path they had constructed led to a legal wall they could not break. I wrote in my notebook, "The harvest has begun, not from wind or rain, but from the seeds a mother sowed with intelligence and patience. They will reap fear, and I, Eleanor, will reap justice." The harvest was not just legal. It was a test of greed, a measure of the folly in thinking a frail mother could not rise. I realized that revenge did not need to be loud, did not need shouting or threats. It could be quiet, patient, and it was precisely that which made the final blow perfect. Meanwhile, in the darkness, the light from the apple orchard glimmered, the ripe red fruit seeming to remind me that everything had begun to bloom. Every small step, every fractional share, every piece of evidence I had gathered converged to create the storm. And I knew, when Michael and Susan realized they were trapped, Eleanor Grace would stand firm amid that storm, not just to reclaim the company, but to reclaim dignity, power, and justice for herself, and for Thomas, who had trusted me to protect everything he had left behind. After the legal harvest had begun, the world around me fell into an unusual silence. The apple orchard was bathed in the golden shadows of the late afternoon. Leaves trembled lightly in the wind, and I felt a strange energy spreading through the air, the latent fear creeping into every step of my children. I knew that just one step remained, and all plans would reach their climax, and tonight was the night the storm would break. Rain began to fall, each drop pounding the tin roof, then splashing to the ground like the anxious beat of a drum. Thunder rolled across the sky. Flashes of lightning streaked through the apple trees, turning the orchard into something almost supernatural. The door shook as a familiar voice called out through the rain. "Mother, please forgive me. I was wrong." Michael stood there, drenched, his eyes filled with fear and remorse. The arrogance that had once made him confidently insolent now dissolved into a trembling figure facing the wrath and silence of his mother. I looked at my child, a mix of hatred and deep sorrow welling within me. All those years of raising, caring for, and sacrificing for Michael and the others. Now it all felt like a theater, staged by him and Susan to seize everything. I lifted my raincoat and stepped outside, offering him my hand without a word of reproach. I led Michael along the muddy path, pale yellow light falling on the apple trees, where the ripe red fruit seemed to witness every secret, every sin. We stopped in the center of the orchard, the place where my husband had fallen, where blood and loss mingled with the scent of damp earth. The rain poured heavily, patting my shoulders and hair, yet I stood tall, looking straight into his eyes, as if piercing through the lies. My voice was low, cold, each word resonating in the damp air. "Michael, you and your siblings killed your father with your greed. Everything since my husband died was ignited by you." Michael recoiled, his hands trembling, eyes frantic as he searched for an escape in the pouring rain. I walked step by step, as if stepping on slippery stones, but each step carried authority. I recounted everything: the fake contracts, the manipulated profits, the times he and Susan plotted to sell the house, to push me aside with not a thought of concern. Every detail I revealed was like a blade cutting straight into his pride, into the confidence he had once considered his strength. The rain poured, the wind howled through the apple branches, shaking every leaf, as if the orchard itself breathed with me, witnessing the truth laid bare. I did not shout, did not raise my voice, for I knew that quiet rage was the most terrifying power. Michael listened, tears mixing with the rain, powerless. For the first time in his life, he saw his mother not just as a gentle parent, but as Eleanor Grace, the one standing above the darkness, sowing justice and executing silent vengeance. I stepped closer, placing my hand on his shoulder, feeling the tremor of the eldest child I had once loved. "I am not taking revenge to harm you," I said, my voice deep. "I am showing you the consequences of greed, of betrayal, and to let you understand that justice does not always come late." The rain fell, and in that moment the apple orchard seemed more alive than ever, the silent witness to every sin, every tear of remorse, and to the resurgence of the power that had once been stripped from me. Michael sank to his knees in the mud, his voice choked. "Mother, please forgive me. I didn't know." I took a deep breath, staring straight into him. "Not for forgiveness, Michael, but so you can learn to live without falling into the mistakes of greed." The heavy rain continued, the wind rushing past, the orchard shaking in rhythm with the breath of both past and present. I stood still, feeling everything: the pain, the loss, and the satisfaction seeping through every drop of water hitting my coat. This was the stormy night when I, Eleanor, witnessed the downfall of those who had once tried to erase me from life. And for the first time, I felt completely in control. Not through violence, but through intellect, patience, and a profound understanding of human nature. In the darkness, I whispered to myself, the harvest was only the beginning, but tonight's storm had taught Michael a lesson he would never forget. I turned away, leaving him kneeling in the mud and rain, and walked back to the old house, where letters, shares, and Thomas's memories awaited me to protect and restore. The apple orchard was no longer just a place of memories. It had become a spiritual battlefield, where Eleanor Grace, the betrayed mother, stood strong, impervious, and unyielding. After that terrible stormy night, when Michael knelt in the mud and the rain, I withdrew into the shadowed apple orchard, leaving my eldest child to face the consequences of his greed. My heart still pounded, not from rage this time, but from a feeling both hollow and liberating. Power had returned, yet the pain and memories remained, threading through me like invisible cords tying me to the past. I stood motionless among the swaying boughs. The red apples trembled in the rain as if breathing with me. And a thought rose up in my mind. I must return to where it all began. The old house where Thomas once lived, where every secret, every dream, and every buried disappointment still awaited me. The old house, abandoned for years, now lay steeped in thick darkness. The wooden door creaked when I opened it. The scent of dust and damp wood flooded my nose. I moved slowly, my heartbeat sinking with the wind moaning through broken panes. Faded curtains stirred, revealing the pallid glow of street lamps outside, like ghosts watching me. I felt every small corner of the house, from the leaning staircase, the cracked walls, to the squeaking floorboards, all reminding me of the past, of Thomas, of those years of joy intertwined with sorrow. In the parlor I saw the little table where Thomas used to sit and write, the place he left behind scraps of paper and letters I had never fully read. I told myself quietly, "Today I will read them, not only to recall our love, but to understand the web of broken ties, the mistakes, and the betrayals." I drew out the last letter. The familiar handwriting trembled but was full of feeling. Each line was a heartbeat, each paragraph a breath from the past. I read the lines aloud, my voice echoing through the empty house. "Eleanor, if you read this letter, please remember that family is the most precious thing. No money, no power can replace love, honesty, and filial duty. Guard your heart, but also be wary of those who claim to be kin, for greed can obscure every affection." I felt each word sink into my chest, sharp with pain, yet warming my spirit with the belief that justice could still be done, through reason and patience. The old house became a stage where past and present braided together. I heard the wind through broken windows and the rain on the tin roof, and before my mind's eye rose the images of Michael, Susan, and Lily, those who had betrayed me. I remembered their mocking smiles, how they regarded me as a frail old mother ignorant of business and blind to the family's true value. Now I stood in this house, reading my husband's words, and realized I was no longer the Eleanor of yesterday. I was the guardian of a legacy, the one re-sowing justice, the witness to everything returning to its rightful place. The words in the letter rang through the room. "Teach them the final lesson with love, Eleanor, not with hatred." I smiled and murmured to myself, that had become my creed. I did not exact revenge with violence, but with strategy, with intellect, with patience and love for memory. Every step, every silent observation, every legal file was a rebirth of justice. The darkness in the old house seemed gentler now, like a blessing upon what I was about to do. I moved through the rooms, touching old photographs, hearing Thomas's laughter in my mind, and I understood that each decision, each act of retribution, was indirectly guided by him from the past. I saw clearly, true power does not lie in money or fame, but in preserving dignity, seeing through human nature and steering people back toward the course of justice. I sat by the table, the yellow lamp lighting the letter, closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and recognized that this house, once the repository of joy and pain, had become the witness to my subtle and silent path of revenge. Each line of text, each memory, each ghost within these walls reminded me that Eleanor Grace was not merely a betrayed mother, but a woman who had turned pain into strength, making love and memory into strategy so that, in the end, everything returned to its rightful place and to the justice Thomas had wished for. As night fell and wind and rain eased, I rose, with the letter in my hand, and smiled. The ghosts in the old house were not sorrow, but reminders that justice, love, and wisdom would always triumph over greed and betrayal. The apple orchard, the old house, and Thomas's memories had become eternal allies in the journey I, Eleanor, was walking. A journey not only of revenge, but of restoring all that had been stolen. After a long night spent beside Thomas's final letters, while the ghosts of the past still lingered in the old house, I knew the real storm had yet to end. The harvest had begun, but now everything required a decisive blow, a final judgment to affirm the justice and power of Eleanor Grace. I left the old house, Thomas's letter still in hand, stepping into the apple orchard where rain, wind, and memories blended into one. I took a deep breath, inhaling the damp scent of the earth, the sweet fragrance of ripe apples, and understood that all my silent steps, all the intricate legal strategies, would now reach their resolution. The courthouse was crowded, the air heavy, and I walked inside with a composed demeanor, each step echoing like the drumbeat of authority. Michael, Susan, and even the youngest daughter, Lily, sat there, their eyes chaotic, tense yet helpless, while I, Eleanor, the mother once cast aside, once kept outside their lives, now stood in the legal spotlight, holding every string. I listened as the lawyer presented the evidence, every detail analyzed, every number clearly explained. And I felt the blood surge through my veins. Everything they had ever thought secure, invisible, now lay bare. Every page, every document, every testimony. Like a dark veil torn away to reveal the full truth. In that moment I recalled Michael coming to beg for forgiveness during the stormy night. He did not know that scene was only a prelude to a quiet but perfect revenge. I saw fear and regret in his eyes, and I, Eleanor, saw the power I had accumulated. Intellect, patience, and courage that Thomas had always trusted in me. All the secretly purchased shares, the anonymous legal files, the evidence Jacob provided, they now merged into a complete picture, and I knew the final strike had arrived. When the judge read the verdict, each word fell like a hammer of destiny. The company was confiscated. All shares, rights, and assets would be returned to Eleanor Grace, the rightful founder, according to Thomas's old will. I heard the sighs of disappointment and anger from Michael and Susan, their faces pale, their glimmers of hope extinguished. I felt the silence envelop the courtroom, the silence of justice served in its proper time, of power restored to its rightful owner, of quiet but undeniable revenge. I stepped outside, standing on the courthouse steps, the afternoon sunlight falling on my hair, on my weathered yet proud face. The wind blew past, as if reminding me that justice never sleeps, that greed and betrayal, however cunning, will always be exposed. I felt every beat of my heart, the silent satisfaction of seeing my enemies face the consequences of their actions. But above all, I felt peace, not from revenge, but because I had fulfilled my duty as a mother, as the guardian of Thomas's legacy and memories, and as Eleanor Grace, who never bowed to injustice. Michael bowed his head, trembling, yet dared not speak. Susan clenched her hands, trying to maintain a strong facade, but deep down, they knew power had slipped from their grasp. Lily stood quietly, looking up at me, as if understanding that the frail old mother they once underestimated had now become the one holding the family's fate. And I realized that Eleanor Grace was no longer the abandoned woman. I was the arbiter of justice, the one restoring order to the family and to Thomas's legacy. I held Thomas's final letter, smiled softly, closed my eyes, and felt the wind, the rustling leaves, and the afternoon sun on my face. Every step, every strategy, every silent observation of mine had been rewarded. This was not a victory of aggression, but a triumph of intellect, patience, love, and justice. And I understood that from this moment, Eleanor Grace stood firm, not only as a mother, but as the ultimate guardian of the values Thomas had once trusted. As I stepped out of the courtroom, the wind lifted scattered documents into the air, as if reminding me that justice and power always find their rightful owner. And Eleanor Grace had finally returned to her place, invulnerable, proud, and complete. As I left the courthouse, the afternoon sunlight fell upon my face, carving each moment of victory into memory. Justice had been served. The shares and assets were back in the hands of Eleanor Grace, the true owner of the family and the company. But I knew this victory was not merely about documents or figures. It was the unavoidable collapse of those who had once underestimated me, those who thought greed and deceit could erase Eleanor from their lives. I returned to the apple orchard, where rain and wind quietly washed away the stains of the past, where Thomas's memory lived on in every tree, every ripe red apple. Michael stood there, slouched and powerless, his eyes burning with regret yet filled with despair. He had once been the pride of the family, the eldest son expected to shoulder everything. But now, all reputation and authority had vanished like smoke. Susan, my daughter-in-law, stood beside him, clutching her handbag, trying to maintain a strong facade, yet anxiety and fear were etched clearly on her face. And Lily, the youngest daughter, remained silent, her gaze drifting across every tree, every trace of the past that had once cast me aside. They walked step by step out of the orchard that had once rejected me, a place that had mocked me, where I had been seen as a frail, powerless mother ignorant of the world. I stood still, watching them disappear among the apple trees, hearing the leaves rustle in the wind like the sigh of justice. That silence was heavy, not cruel delight, but the moment when Eleanor Grace felt the full measure of the power she had accumulated. Every action, every quiet step, every piece of collected evidence, and every sophisticated legal strategy had now fulfilled its purpose: to restore what was rightfully mine, to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The apple orchard seemed more alive than ever. The bright red apples reflected on the wet ground, reminding me of every painful memory, every sleepless night, every quiet tear shed. Yet each apple also testified to patience, intellect, and inner strength that had allowed Eleanor to survive it all, transforming pain into power and justice. I walked among the trees, my hand brushing smooth bark, feeling the heartbeat, the breath of past and present merging as one. Michael paused, looking back one last time, as if seeking an explanation or an apology. But I only met his gaze, calm yet unwavering. I needed no apology, no remorse from them. What they had to feel were the consequences of greed, of betrayal, and of underestimating the mother they once thought weak. I saw clearly that their collapse was not merely material loss, it was disappointment. The loss of reputation, and a reminder that true power lies in intellect, patience, and courage. Dusk fell, the apple trees bending under the pale golden light, creating a scene both tragic and majestic. I stepped onto the porch, took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of damp earth and sweet, ripe apples. Within me arose a profound sense of peace. Eleanor Grace had survived betrayal, had witnessed the downfall of those who once sought to destroy her, and now she stood firm amidst power, justice, and memory. I smiled softly, thinking of Thomas, of his letters, his teachings, and the values he once trusted. Every step through this orchard was a testament to my sophisticated yet humane journey of revenge. Not through aggression, not through violence, but through intellect, patience, and a deep love for the family, even if they had once betrayed me. Michael and Susan faded away. Lily remained silent, and I knew that from now on, the apple orchard was not only a repository of memories, but a spiritual battlefield where Eleanor Grace, the mother once cast aside, had reclaimed everything: dignity, justice, and power. Standing there among the trees, I realized their collapse marked the beginning of a new chapter. Eleanor Grace had survived, had triumphed, but more importantly, I had reborn myself, becoming the guardian of my family's legacy and true values. In that moment, the wind, the rustling leaves, and the scent of ripe apples blended as one, as if to remind me that power is not something that can be stolen. It is something preserved through intellect, patience, and a heart that never yields. As Michael, Susan, and Lily left the apple orchard in complete collapse, I stood among the trees, listening to the leaves rustle in the wind like a melody of mixed sorrow and joy, harmonizing with the steady rhythm of my heart after so many years of turmoil. I felt a profound silence, not loneliness, but deep serenity. Eleanor Grace had reclaimed everything, and now power, justice, and victory were no longer instruments of revenge. They were proof of intellect, patience, and an everlasting love for memory. My steps carried me to the place where Thomas had fallen, a gnarled old apple tree, hollow and withered, yet still standing resilient against time. I knelt, touching the damp earth still scented with yesterday's rain, realizing that here, in pain and loss, I had found the strength to live again. With trembling yet determined hands, I lifted the last apple seed from my basket, a tiny seed carrying the family's history, Thomas's memory, and all the lessons life had taught me. I carefully planted it, covering the soil bit by bit, clenching my fists as if entrusting all hope, justice, and a reminder that life always finds a way to regenerate, even after the harshest shocks. Beside me, a curious little neighbor girl approached, her eyes sparkling with wonder. "Mrs. Eleanor, why are you planting this apple tree?" she asked, her innocent voice tugging at my heart. I met her clear, bright gaze, seeing hope and innocence, and suddenly realized that these children were the future, the ones who would learn to value family, love, and honesty, principles Thomas and I had always preserved. I smiled, gentle yet strong, and replied, "Not everything that dies is lost. Some things, if sown in the right place at the right time, will grow stronger than ever." The girl nodded, eyes wide, as if understanding a great secret adults often conceal. I gazed at the orchard, where other apple trees ripened red, each branch, each fruit telling its own story of love, betrayal, revenge, and ultimately, rebirth. Every step I took on the dew-soaked grass, every seed planted, served as a reminder that Eleanor Grace was not merely the mother who had once been cast aside, but also the sower of justice and memory, transforming pain into action, loss into new life. Looking up at the golden evening sky, with clouds drifting slowly and a gentle breeze stirring, I realized that life is never simple, nor does it end as we expect. Those who had underestimated me had lost everything, but I, Eleanor, remained standing, looking forward with faith that family is more than blood. It is a legacy of honesty, love, and wisdom. I gently stroked the newly planted tree, feeling the life force flowing through the soil and the tiny seed. And a strange peace rose within me. This orchard, once a battlefield of greed and betrayal, had become a symbol of vitality, renewal, and the journey Eleanor Grace had traveled. From pain to power, from being cast aside to subtle triumph, from loss to new hope. The little neighbor girl stood silently beside me, and in her eyes I saw trust and curiosity about the world. I whispered, as if speaking to her, to myself, and to the past. Always plant seeds in the right place, at the right time. Even when everything seems dead, there is a way for life to return. In that moment, the last rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, illuminating Eleanor Grace's face. The mother, the wife, the guardian of memory and legacy. I felt the pulse of the orchard, the breath of the wind, the tiny apple seeds in the soil, and knew that the story was not truly over. Yet from this moment, I had found the strength to move forward and to teach the next generation that life, justice, and love will always find a way to be reborn, even after the harshest pain. After planting the final apple seed in the orchard where Thomas had fallen, I stood still, watching the last sunlight glimmer through the leaves, listening to the wind stir like a soundtrack of memories. Every step, every handful of soil covering the seed was proof of Eleanor Grace's silent yet perfect journey of revenge. A strange serenity washed over me, as if old wounds were healed through the intellect, patience, and love I had held for my family, even when they had betrayed me. Returning to the old house, once witness to all pain and schemes, I opened the ancient wooden chest holding Thomas's journals and letters. The pen lay on the desk, the ink dried, but still bold enough to write the final lines. I lifted it, pausing for a moment, feeling my heartbeat sync with the rhythm of the orchard, with the ripening apples outside the window. I began to write, each word flowing like tears and release. I do not seek revenge. I only teach them the final lesson of love. These words were not a confession, but a reminder to Eleanor Grace that revenge was never the goal. It was a tool to protect sacred values. I recalled each moment my children had entered my life with betrayal. Michael's greedy gaze, Susan's deceitful gestures, Lily's false smiles. Every event, every word, every quiet step I had taken was recorded in the journal, not to boast of victory, but to reflect on the journey and understand that true power comes from awareness, intellect, and calmness amidst temptation. Sitting in the silent room, the dim light filtering through the window, I remembered lonely nights after being cast out, tears falling in darkness, and the mocking laughter of those who had called me weak. Yet now I realized Eleanor Grace had never truly been weak. Every step, from silently observing, documenting, collecting evidence, to planning the company's repurchase, proved the inner strength that no greed or betrayal could defeat. I continued writing, each line recounting a life of betrayal, greed, pain, and intricate revenge strategies. Yet beneath it all lay a deep love for my family. I remembered Thomas, his teachings on love, justice, and patience. In these lines, I did not seek to justify myself, but to review everything through Eleanor's eyes. the mother, the wife, the guardian of memory. I understood that true revenge was not punishing others, but affirming dignity, sowing seeds of love and justice that had once been destroyed. The journal closed, ink dried, yet every word still resonated in my mind like the pulse of a life lived fully. I looked out the window, where the newly planted apple seed lay silent in the soil, waiting to sprout. I understood that the journey of revenge was over, but the journey of life, replanting seeds of love and family values, was only beginning. Eleanor Grace was no longer the abandoned mother. I had become the woman who safeguarded justice, memory, and the family's heart. Every action leading toward the ultimate light, renewal, and inner peace. In that moment, the little neighbor girl stood outside the window, her eyes sparkling with curiosity and hope. I smiled, sending a silent message. Remember, not everything that dies is lost. Some seeds, nurtured with love and wisdom, will bloom stronger than ever. And I knew Eleanor Grace had truly found herself, mother, protector of legacy, and planter of the final seed of love and justice, leaving a message no family member or future generation could ever forget. After setting down my pen and closing Thomas's journal, I stood quietly in the room, gazing at the apple orchard outside the window. A place that had once been a battlefield of greed and betrayal, now brimming with life. Every lush leaf, every ripe red apple told its own story, reminding me of the arduous journey I had endured, from the pain of being abandoned by my children to silently observing, calculating every step of my revenge, and finally arriving at the moment where justice and power returned to me. I felt the heartbeat of the earth, of the trees, and the lingering memory of Thomas in the evening breeze. Eleanor Grace, the mother once cast aside, now stood between light and shadow with a serenity that was almost surreal, knowing she had fulfilled her ultimate mission. A year had passed since I planted the last apple seed. The orchard now thrived, its fruit sweet and fragrant, a living testament to the intellect, patience, and love I had poured into my family, despite their betrayals. Every step on the dew-soaked grass, every gust of wind rustling through the branches reminded me of the painful days, the quiet tears, and the meticulous strategies I had used to transform loss into strength and betrayal into lessons. I smiled, not from vengeance, but because I had replanted hope, love, memory, and dignity, the values Thomas and I had always cherished. In my final days, my body felt lighter, my mind calmer. Michael, Susan, and Lily had learned the lesson, not through scolding, but through fairness, intellect, and patience, the power I held. They lost all authority, reputation, and deceitful advantage. Yet I felt no hatred. The ultimate lesson about love and family values had been delivered and etched into their consciousness. Eleanor Grace could now withdraw in peace. One night, as a gentle rain fell, I lay in my familiar bed, listening to the wind through the apple trees, breathing in the earthy scent and the sweetness of ripened fruit. I smiled in my sleep, a soft, serene smile, sending a quiet message to the world. True power does not lie in revenge, but in protecting sacred values, sowing hope, and giving love without expecting anything in return. Eleanor Grace had completed her mission, safeguarding legacy, memory, and the orchard, a symbol of justice, wisdom, and compassion. The next morning, an envelope appeared on the office desk, addressed to social agencies. Divide this orchard and its resources among the orphans of the town. Eleanor Grace departed, leaving no hatred behind, only love, life lessons, and proof that pain can become strength, and every ending can plant the seeds of new beginnings. The apple orchard flourished, young trees growing strong. A reminder that Eleanor Grace, the mother, wife, guardian of memory, had lived fully, leaving a powerful message. Love, justice, and hope will always find their way to rebirth, even when all seems lost. I stood in the orchard, watching the sunlight glint on the apples, hearing the birds and the whispering wind, feeling life all around me. Eleanor Grace was gone, but every breath of the orchard, every leaf, every bright red apple was a testament to her life. A life full of drama, betrayal, revenge, but ultimately love, peace, and undying vitality. I closed my eyes, smiled, and knew that Eleanor Grace had truly sown the final seeds of her life. Seeds of love, justice, and hope, ensuring the world would never forget.